Hey guys, Eric here. Thanks for coming and checking this video out on IDs versus classes. Now, I know this may not sound like a super exciting topic, but I think it's really important and we're going to do some really cool stuff in this video. And I think the most important thing that I'm going to cover is why would you use one over the other? And really, what is the difference? Because I think as you've probably experienced if you've come to watch this video is like there's actually a lot of similarities between the two. An ID is made to be used on only one element. Body, these are all elements, also known as tags. If you're new to HTML, you could actually write div and then do hashtag header and then hit tab. Pretty nice, right? And while I'm at it, I'll cover class so I don't forget. So if I want to do a class, I can do div dot. And then since we're not going to have multiple headers, maybe we're going to have multiple I don't know, this probably sound weird, phone numbers or something, right? So I'll put a class of phone on there because maybe it's like a directory for people and they all have phone numbers and we want to style them all. So then I would put a class on there. Okay, so now that being said, let's say this right here is legitimate, okay? So if I have multiple phones, let's say 555 and this one's, 888 and it actually, I mean, we could sit and put numbers in here if we want. But this is legitimate, and this is what we call valid HTML, okay? Now, if I decided that I wanted to put IDs on here, okay, this is not valid HTML because it would still run. So let's run it real quick because I want to prove that like this isn't going to stop it from running, okay? You still see the numbers, and that's fine. Everything is okay. And this is the confusing part is because I could also style this. Let's add a style sheet real quick. So we'll do that by putting in a link here, hit tab. Now, I already have a style sheet file over here, so I'm going to say style.css. Now, the reason it's so confusing is because if I wanted to style that, I can say hashtag, and I could say phone, and then I could say, color is going to be red, okay? When I'm teaching you stuff, keep in mind that it's not very pretty because I'm just trying to teach you the concepts. I'm not trying to make a pretty website. So there's going to be a red number, right? They'll both style red. Technically, you're not supposed to be styling multiple elements with an ID. It does work, but what I wish browsers would do, and they don't, and they never will, is I wish they would just style the first one, right? Because technically, you're only supposed to be using an ID once. Not like you can use the attribute ID on multiple things, but I can't put two phones on two different elements with the ID, right? So that's why it's confusing. If you're getting used to HTML and CSS and you want to see if you've messed this up, if you've put too many IDs on the page with the same name, go to the W3c Validator. These are the guys that make the rules for the internet, right? So they have a validator and you can put addresses in there and see if they have validation errors. Now, I'm not going to deploy this, but if I deployed this to a live URL and then ran it through here, put it here and hit check, it would say, oh, whoa, hey, wait, hold up there. You have two IDs with the same name of phone, and that is incorrect. So what I want to tell you is that having bad markup, having bad ID, too many IDs with the same name, or more than one with the same name, I shouldn't say too many, is actually bad for SEO. So Google can come look at your site, validate it and say, or any other search engine and say, oh my gosh, these guys aren't even using correct HTML markup. Let's not give them a high score, right? This is no different than if you have for instance, if you're familiar with validation, if you do an image without an alt. So if I say, my photo or something right here, right, is where it lives, okay? And I'm trying to put an image in here, but I don't provide an alt tag or I leave the alt tag empty, I'll also get a validation error. Now, I'm not deploying right now, but I did go and check a few of my websites for validation errors, and I'm pretty good about not having them, but I found on this one, I do have one. So if I go here real quick to my own personal website, I found a validation error because I validated this once upon a time, but I feel like what happened is they deprecated something. And so it's kind of actually good to go back and check occasionally. So I'm going to check this live URL for validation errors. And you're going to see I have one validation error. And what it says is the type attribute is unnecessary for JavaScript resources. And what that basically means is that now you don't need this anymore. That used to actually come when you put a script tag in your code. with Visual Studio or any other text editor that has like auto completions, it would just add this automatically because it was like needed. But they're actually deprecating a lot of things because the script tag says enough. It doesn't act that now they're saying, hey, you don't even need to put type text/JavaScript because we know just because you put the word script here. So this has been deprecated at some point and now it's not validating completely. Am I really super worried about it? Not right now, I'm not. I should go change it if I have time. But essentially, I'm not really worried about this website indexing anywhere. I kind of link it from like some emails and, you know, whatever, show people my portfolio. They're never going to go run a validation on it. So I'm not super worried about SEO. However, if I was worried about SEO, I wouldn't want this. I think this is kind of a small error. It's actually a warning. You'll see errors from stuff, but this is actually a warning. So that kind of indicates that it was deprecated at one time too. So use the validator tool. You're going to see that if you have more than one ID, that it's going to tell you, and it's not going to like it. Okay. Same as if you had, like I said, no alt tag on your image source. All of my images on here all have alt tags because I ran it through here once before. So if we inspect this, this is just a Giphy. It looks like a video, but it's actually just an image. So if we go up here and we look at the associated code, you're going to see that I didn't forget my alt tag. It's right here, right? Which is the name of the project or whatever. If it wasn't there, I'd be getting an error from that. Okay, so I probably beat that one to death, but that's the best way to figure out if you're doing it right. And if you're unsure, then go ahead and check that out, okay? So that being said, what's the right way to do this? The right way to do this is just use classes, okay? Don't use IDs. Now, what I do is, unless I'm 100% sure, okay, and then we can go over here and we could still style it with a dot. If you're unfamiliar with CSS, you style IDs with hashtags and you style classes with dots. And notice, here's the similarities, is that nothing actually changed, right? Oh, I have a broken image now because I didn't actually have a source for it. Let's get rid of that. Nothing changed. Again, that's where the confusion comes in, is because technically you can do the same styling with an ID as you can with a class. And that is pretty much the only difference as far as HTML and CSS goes, which, if you're anything like me, like, that sounds minor, right? It doesn't even seem like that big of a deal. It does get more complicated when you move into JavaScript, which I'm going to cover with you in a second. So that being said, I want to say one more thing about this whole div ID class thing. And this is what I want. So for me, it was like, okay, which one do I use right now? And it would always slow me down. And I'm really big about workflow. So I was like, how can I like determine which one I'm supposed to use without having to think about it so hard? Here's what I found over years and years and years of writing HTML. What you should do is you should always default to using class. Because if you're not sure, this one will never throw an error saying you've used it too many times. So if you're 100% sure that you're not going to use it again, like a header or a footer or a form, for instance. Forms I always have an ID on because I don't want other forms to be interacted by event listeners that I'm using in my JavaScript. That's okay to use an ID. So when you're writing your HTML, what I want you to do is I want you to basically always just use a class. Honestly, the ID, you can put a class here too. It's not going to hurt anything. There are reasons you might want to use an ID later. Let's do some lorem ipsum. Lorem. So kind of trying to get down the page is what I'm doing so I can show you something. And I need a bunch of content to do that. So I'm going to do this. Hopefully that'll get me low enough on the page that... let's see here. Let's just shrink it in like this. So I have a scroll bar, right? So scroll. Okay. So now if I go down here and I put, let's do div hashtag footer. Okay. Okay. So now, why is this important? So I have a footer down here and I have an ID on it for a specific reason. This is another reason you might want an ID. Okay. So you can link to the bottom of the page. So what you can do is you can say, maybe you want to say div go to bottom. And actually, we could just make this a link. So we'll put an A in here like this, A. And then we're going to say href equals. And instead of going to a website, like, because you could put in http:// google.com or something like that. I'm just going to say hashtag footer. Okay. And I named it footer, right? Okay, cool. So this should work. I don't do this very often, so hopefully it does work. But if it doesn't, then I'll fix it and we'll make it work. So let's see what happens. Yep, perfect. So see how it went to the bottom and actually scrolled to the bottom of the page. That's why you can't have two, is because if you're going to link into a page, then you need to have a hashtag. You can actually link to other websites that way. So actually, let's do that real quick. That would be really cool. So that's going to be a perfect example. So let's do this real quick. Let's go to, say, Amazon, Amazon.com. Okay. Let's go down here and find an ID real quick. Let's inspect this and see if it has an ID. This is a class. Do we have an ID anywhere? Script. There's a script ID. Never seen an ID on a script, but I guess there might be a reason for that. Okay, here's div ID desktop 2. Okay, so check this out. Let's get this thing. So if I link here, I'm gonna say go to Amazon on at specific point or something. You might say desktop 2 or whatever's down there, recommended items. I don't care, whatever you want to say. So we're going to do hashtag this, and I need to get to the page. So the page is Amazon. So I can actually link not only to my own pages with IDs, but I can link to other pages with their IDs and go directly to that spot on the page. So let's check this out. So we need to get this back over here, go back to our thing. Let's close this, refresh. So this is now not going to link to the footer, it's going to link to Amazon. And notice it took me down the page. Isn't that sweet? It's funny because I actually was doing HTML and CSS for like a couple years before I realized that how important an ID was for like linking to specific parts of a page. So cool. I think I've covered everything related to HTML and CSS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how this can be important when you use JavaScript. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to get rid of all this because I don't need any of this. Okay. And let's get rid of this thing. Okay. So as far as JavaScript goes, what I want to do is I want to put this back to an ID. Okay. And I'm going to show you how to access. First of all, let's just access different things. Show you how to access them, and then let me show you like how we can style multiple things or like do some dynamic, really cool things with JavaScript. Okay. So the header, let's say these both don't have anything in them and I want to, have you guys ever inspected a website and all you saw was empty divs, but no content? Or like looked at page, let's say, you know, because that does get injected with JavaScript, so you probably would see content. Let's say you've looked at like, say, a GitHub repo and it looks like this and you're like, why? How does this even run? It's because they're using JavaScript to inject into it. So let's go ahead and get our script tag. And that's going to go right here. Oops. Let's do the script source. Notice, we remember about validation earlier, that doesn't get the type anymore, right? So it just has the source. So now I'm going to say app.js. And one thing I always do, it's just like a habit, is because if you start writing stuff, it doesn't work, you're like, why? Is let's just console log works real quick. And let's get back to our thing here. Okay, so now let's do that. Okay, works, perfect. That's coming from my JavaScript, coming from my HTML. It loaded the script, loaded this, right? Cool. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say in the header, I want to inject something. So the way I do that, let's say inject, into ID. And then we want to do the same thing for our class, right? Into class. Okay, let's say document dot get element by ID, okay? And the ID is going to be header. What we want to do is set the inner HTML equal to, we'll set it to, this is the header. Okay. Refresh, and it's in there. Now, the reason I used it inner HTML is because I could actually do like an H1 here or something like that, which is, I think, very helpful. So another default for me is that I always use inner HTML instead of inner text, because watch what happens when I say inner text. It'll go in there, but it will go in as like a string, basically, right? It doesn't go in with formatting. Okay, so how do we do the same thing for a class? Instead of saying get element by ID, we want to say get element by class name. By class name, okay? And then we'll say phone, right? Because that's what our phone is. We have a phone over there. And then we'll say, this is the phone. Okay. Refresh. And what happened? Did we get an error? No, we didn't. Phone, do I still have it? I do. Oh, this is why, because this comes back array-like. So check this out. So if we want to access it, we have to say 0 because there's more than one. This is one of the reasons why I really wanted to show this to you. So now I'm only getting the first one on the page. I have to go to the index. It's kind of array-like. If you know JavaScript a little bit, 0 is how we access the array of the index of arrays. Okay. When we access classes, they come back array-like because there's multiple of them. This is why this is important. So notice it went in. Now, what I can do is if I have more of these, okay, if I go back over here and I have more of these, okay, then what I can do is access them by their indexes, okay? So let's go ahead and get another one in here. And I can say 1, and I can say this is the second phone, right? Now, honestly, I already knew that I shouldn't be using IDs twice, so I've never actually tried to inject into 2 different IDs ever. This will be the first time ever. Let's see what happens when I have 2 different headers and I'm injecting inner HTML to that ID. What do you think will happen? I don't really know, honestly. I think because CSS styles them both, even though it's not correct and you shouldn't be doing it, it still does it. I'm thinking that I'm going to guess right now that this goes into both of them without doing indexes. So let's see. I'm kind of curious, or maybe I'll get an error. I'm not really sure. No, it only goes into the first one. Oh, that's interesting. It's almost like this one's already at the index of 0 and that's it. It only goes there, right? And this is how you learn stuff about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You just experiment. And I just ran my own experiment in front of you because I think it's helpful. I've taught a lot of people. They always appreciate, in my opinion, when a developer, even if they know a lot, is humble enough to say, hey, you know what? I'm not sure about that. Let's experiment and see, right? So that's just what I did here for you today. And I highly encourage that. I think it's a really good habit to be, first of all, humble when you develop and always curious, like what would happen? I'm not really sure. So let's talk about the query selector while we're at it, because I think this is important. This is how I actually like to access stuff. Okay, so instead of doing this number, okay, let's actually bring this down because I'm going to rearrange it just to show you how similar it is. I'm going to say document.query selector, query selector. And because it doesn't know if I'm talking about an ID, notice I replaced this word get element by ID. It doesn't know if I'm talking about an ID. I have to put hashtag here. Okay, I actually really like this query selector because it kind of emulates how jQuery accesses stuff. And I'm not a huge fan of jQuery because it's an additional library and I don't like using it. I like using raw JavaScript. Now, that's a personal preference. I wouldn't say don't ever use jQuery if you're getting used to doing JavaScript or you're being taught at a boot camp or something like that. They usually teach jQuery. It's important because it's in a lot of websites and it's good to have, especially if you're working on stuff in the past. But for instance, like if you're going to become a React developer, which is what I am, or single page application developer, Angular, Vue, something like that, they don't use jQuery. So it's kind of like it was a big deal, but you don't necessarily need to keep using it. Well, that was way too much about this, but this is kind of jQuery like, and that's why I like it. So let's go ahead and see what happens now. So it still injects, right? So I use the query selector instead of get element by ID, did the same thing. I could do that with classes too. So let's come down here and do this little number. Oops, go there, okay. And let's see what happens. Now notice it's basically the same thing. You're not really changing anything. So I'm trying to always use the query selector. If you're anything like me, a lot of times you'll like start writing get element by ID and you're like, oh crap, I could have used the query selector. You actually can see that in one of my last videos because I'm just trying to get used to doing it all the time. So now this won't work, right? And think about it. Why won't it work? Something I didn't do yet. Let me refresh to prove it. Nothing. Okay, look, cannot read property 0 of null. That's because I need a dot here for the classes. Doesn't know it's a class anymore, right? Because the query selector isn't defining it as a class here. So I put a dot here. Now I'm accessing classes. Acts the same now, right? Oh, you know what? Query selector all. You have to say all when you're getting the... there is some small differences about query selector, and honestly, I don't want to get too deep into that because it would be a whole nother tutorial, but we need all here. And now it works, right? Because this brings it back array-like. In fact, let's go back over here. We have 2 divs of header. Let's do another little experiment, okay? What happens if I put all here? Does it act like an array? I don't even know. I haven't tried it. Let's try. Doesn't go in, but if I say 0 here, what happens? So this is actually a query selector all and query selector. Query selector is basically like what you should be using for IDs, and query selector all is what you would be using for arrays. So isn't that interesting what happened there? So I'm assuming that if we did all here and we can change the behavior of how our JavaScript acts like this, we can go to 1 and we can fill that other ID. Now you do not want to do that though. This is wrong. I'm just showing you how query selector works, but this is wrong. You do not want to do that. Okay? All right. So now let's go back to my preference. Okay, you're just going to say query selector for IDs, query selector all for classes, right? Let's get rid of this. Everything should be going in. Okay, cool. Yeah, we could have actually put phone numbers in here if we wanted, right? I mean, I don't know why I'm putting letters. You could put a phone number in there if you wanted to, right? You could put anything you want. You could also put HTML. Let's say this is an H2, just like you did on the other one, right? No problem. / H2. Okay. Let's check that out. Sweet. Let's get rid of all this stuff for just a second. Okay, so I want to do this. Well, let's actually have some stuff in here. This is phone number this is phone number this, and those aren't real phone numbers, but that's fine. And I have a whole bunch of them, okay? And okay, now something like that. Okay, now I've got a bunch of numbers, and I don't even want you to think about this header at all right now. We're not talking about that. We're talking about how we can actually access them all at one time because they all have a class on them. We can use this query selector to access them all. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say var phones equals document query selector all. And actually, let's log that because I want to see what that looks like. It's been a long time since I looked at it, but it should look sort of array-like. Let's take a look. Yeah, it's an array. It's got like an array in here. Node list 2. Why is there only 2 though? Length of 2. Phone. Oh, I didn't save the index. There was 2 there before. Let's take a look now. There should be, how many have I put, right? Node list 7. Cool. See how it's like an array? It's got arrays here and commas in between it, things like that. Cool. So now what I want to show you, this is where I think it gets interesting with JavaScript and classes. So now I could say phone.forEach. I can use a for each loop on this, right? Phone.forEach. When you pass in a for each, you get a callback function. That's what this is. And I'm passing in a parameter of element. The callback function, I'm using an arrow function. I love arrow functions. I think they look nice. Feel free to use a regular function if you want. And now what I want to do is I want to do something to them. So I want to say for each, I want to say element dot add event listener. Okay. And I'm adding an event listener once for all these items, which is really cool because a lot of times, in my opinion, when you first start learning to code, you have this urge to like add an event listener separately for every single thing you're doing. But remember, we're in a loop here and we have access to every single element. Okay. So first of all, before I get carried away, if I log element, now that I'm in this for each loop, I want you to see what it does. Okay. So let's take a look. Okay, so look at that. Isn't that sweet? Yeah, I love it. Okay, so now it's like you get that whole div, the whole part of that DOM right there, that node, right? So let's get rid of that. So now I'm going to say element.addEventListener. We want to listen for click events. And now I'm going to say we're going to pass in a callback function, okay? And what we want to do is when we click on one, we'll alert you clicked a phone. Cool. So when I clicked on one, I want to get an alert and it says you clicked a phone. So let's see what happens. So I'm going to click You clicked a phone. Cool. Cool. Now notice, even though this is like a click event, it doesn't have an arrow, which I don't know if this is like super on topic, but I think it's important anytime you use, whenever you use event listeners, I think it's really important that you go in and you do like cursor pointer, right? Because I think it makes more sense that people, because it's like clickable, so you should make it look like a clickable thing. So now I have a pointer, right? And I can click on any one of these. You clicked on a phone. You clicked on a phone, okay? Now, what's really cool is that maybe I want to tell them what type of phone they clicked on. And I can still do that within this event listener. I can add in over here an attribute called like, I can make this up. So this attribute class is built into the browser. It knows what to do with it. Like I could style with it, which I did over here. I put red on there, or I could put a cursor on it. Now I'm making up my own custom one. I'm going to say type of phone equals. Now the browser will have no idea what to do with this, but my click event will, because I'll tell it to. So I'm going to say this is a cell. And I'm going to say that this is a, oh, you know, let's go ahead and put this in real quick, and then we'll determine what they are. Okay. So like this. Okay, boom. And then, oops, let's put a little space there. So this one is going to be, a home. This is going to be a business. And then this one is going to be a, let's leave that one a cell. And then this one is going to be your mom's house. No, I'm just kidding. I don't even know. Let's just say all the rest of these are cell, okay? But we have a couple different ones, home, and then a bunch of cells. That's fine. Okay, now, and actually that's cool. What you could do, you could style them based on if it was mom or grandma or brother or sister. Like that's something you could do if you wanted to. But let's go with this way for now. I don't know what kind of app we're building, but I think it gets the point across. So now what I want to do is I'm going to find out what it is by saying var type of phone. Now I named it the exact same thing as I did over there, but technically this could be named, Apple or whatever. You know what? Let's actually do that. Because sometimes that gets confusing when things are the exact same name. I'm going to say, first of all, I need to know what the event is, okay? And so the event has information that I need, which is the attribute. So I'm going to say E. Actually, that's really shorthand. You can write E, but I'm going to put event because it makes more sense. So I'm going to say event here, dot target, dot event.target, dot get attribute, get event.target. So I'm having a little bit of a, why is it not popping up? It should be. I think this is correct. Attribute. And we're going to say we want the type of phone. Okay. And I store that in Apple. Okay. So let's see what that looks like as a log real quick. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to say Apple. Okay. So when I know that sounds weird, but I'm really trying to point out that this variable name can be whatever you want. I'm going to change it to the word type of phone in a second because that makes more sense to me when I write programs. But let's take a look at it real quick. So when I click, oh, it works. Cool. So it didn't autocomplete. Sell. Here's home, business. Yes. It's getting awesome. We're making awesome code. Okay, cool. So now what I can do is I can say something like this inside here. I can alert. Let's do some template literals. I'm going to say you are going to call a and then we're going to put a $ curly Apple, because that's what we name the variable, phone. So now it's going to say, when I alert, it's going to say you are going to call a business phone. You are going to call a cell phone. Okay. Refresh. Let's see here. You are going to call a cell phone. You are going to call a home phone. You are going to call a business phone, right? Isn't this sweet? Isn't this sweet stuff? I mean, we hardly wrote any code at all, but if you use classes correctly with a for loop, a for each loop, it's really powerful. Okay. So not only could I do that, so my for loop's up here, right? Here, I would label these too. I would say add event listener that on click makes an alert. Okay. Okay. Now I would make another thing down here because I'm still in this loop. This is my loop up here. Okay. Loops through all phones. When you start doing a lot of stuff inside of a loop, it starts getting confusing. So it's nice to like know you're still in a loop. So down here, I'm still in a loop, right? So I could do other things other than just add an event listener. I could say style phones based on type, okay? First of all, let's change this thing to from Apple to type of phone, right? So I'm gonna say type of phone. I just changed all three of these places. I don't need to console log anymore. Not important. Oops, keep that there. Okay. So let's save that, make sure it's still working. Anytime you change things like that, you just want to double check. Okay, I'm calling a cell phone, and that works. I'm calling a home phone. That works. Okay, so now that I know the type, I'm still in this loop. I can style dynamically, okay? So yeah, I can change them all red over here by accessing phone, but with JavaScript, I can style them dynamically. Let's get rid of red over here, okay? And we'll just go back to black, okay? I'm going to say I want cell phones to be red, okay? And I want home phones to be purple. And I think you get my drift. Let's just do one more. We have a business phone, right? Business phone. Okay, the business phone is going to be green, okay? And I mean, you could do anything, and I know this like isn't like the prettiest application, but I like keeping syntax really short because you can expand this, okay? I know you can. Take this and make something better of it, okay? So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna make this happen. So I'm gonna say I'm in a loop, right? I'm in this loop, okay? So every time it loops, it's doing something. So if I say if, and then we element got attribute triple equals cell, okay, then we will do this, okay? So we're starting with the cell phones, right? We want them to be red, right? Okay, so we're gonna make that functionality right now, but I'm gonna log right real quick to make sure this is working. We have cells, okay? Now how many cells do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So we should actually see 5 console logs of we have cells if this is working correctly as of right now. 5, perfect. Basically say element dot class list dot add. Now we can add a class here, and the class we want to add is red, okay? Now we don't have a class of red yet, but what I want you to see real quick is if I refresh this, okay, check this out. When I inspect, okay, we don't want this anymore. That's kind of annoying. If I go over here and inspect this, okay, I'll actually see that my cell phones have a class of red. They have a class of phone and they have a class of red, which is pretty cool, right? So now all I've got to do is I've got to go over here and I've got to make a class of red. So I'm going to say class, not class, red, color red. Okay, now check this out. Now only my cell phones are going to be red. Well, hold on, something didn't work. Dot red, class red. What happened here? It actually should be working. Type of phone, class red. Oh, I know what I did. I just put, I put that, sorry, that's some more React syntax. You don't do that in regular HTML. You do that in React. Inline in React. Sorry, I'm talking too much about React. Okay, red, boom. Okay, nice. Now, what did we say? We said purple and green for the other ones, right? So now we can just add a couple more classes here. I'm going to say green and purple. Okay, so now I'm going to say here green, and this is purple. Okay, now let's go back here. Now, let me ask you, how do you think I would finish this? I did this to make stuff red. What do you think I would do in order to make things, green or blue? And if you said copy this and do it again, then you're absolutely right. But what I can do is I can say, I can come out here, okay? I can take this out because it's like kind of long and not so good looking. And I can say var apple equals, right? I just want to point out that it can be anything. And now I can put if apple equals cell, right? Because apple is going to be what that evaluates to. So this will still work. So we're still going to get red. Okay, but now I already have type of phone up here. I could use it again, but I'll just say phone. If phone equals cell, okay, this will work again. I'm gonna just refresh, okay, and they're all still clickable, right? We're all still clickable. But now what I can do is I can do an else if, and I can actually just copy this to make it easier. So I'll say else, don't autocomplete, and then pass in your if, okay, tab that, else if phone equals home. We're gonna make homes purple, right? That's what we decided on. So I'm gonna say purple. Okay, and then now I'm going to do an else if again. We want this to look pretty. Keep everything nice and clean. Else if phone equals business. Then we're going to go green, right? Something's wrong. What did we miss? Oh, my quote. Okay, there we go. All right, let's get rid of this stuff here. Okay, cool. I think this is looking good. What do you think, guys? Okay, cool. Now, let's take a look. Cool. I can barely see the purple. I guess I could make it a little bigger. But yeah. What do you guys think about that? It's pretty cool stuff, right? Even though the beginning part of this video is probably more important when you initially start coding about just like the validator and stuff like that, I think this is where this JavaScript stuff is where classes and IDs get a lot more important too as well. So it's a really important, it gets more and more important, the difference between classes and IDs as you keep up leveling up your knowledge. I've talked a lot about classes mainly because they're the ones that are really the harder the ones to use, because you might need a loop and stuff like that. But here's a scenario for when you would want to only use an ID, okay? So let's say over here, let's just kind of get rid of this stuff, okay? Let's get rid of everything real quick. Okay, now when I would use an ID, mostly is I use IDs for forms, because I do not want, if I have more than one form on a page, I do not want that to be affected by other forms. So I'll say contact me, something like that, okay? So now I have a contact me. Now notice I get an autocomplete with action. Action is not important for JavaScript, but let's get rid of it. So I'm gonna say that, and then I'm gonna open the form up, and I'm gonna say input, and it doesn't really matter what inputs I have here, but I'll say input, and this is gonna be placeholder, your name, and then placeholder phone, like you contact me. Yeah, do I want your phone? Something like that. Okay, it doesn't really matter what this thing is about. So we're gonna say button, and then we're gonna say submit. Okay, and now we should have a little form. Cool. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, so now what I can do is if I go over here and I say I access the ID, so I'm gonna say document dot query selector right here, and then we're going to go to the form ID. The form ID was contact me, I think. We'll double check if it doesn't work. And we're going to do dot add event listener, and then parens quotes submit is the first one, and because we want a submit event. Remember earlier we did a click event, but we're doing a submit event on this. Now we can put in our callback function, and that's going to have the event in it. Okay, now we can say log works. Works. Okay, so now I'm going to save this. Now check this out. When I fill this out, and hit submit, it just like flashed over here. If you noticed real quick, you might have to go back and watch it. I'll do it again. So if I hit submit again, didn't do it that time. Check this out though. Submit works. Why technically index? Why still going to the hashtag there? Okay, let's do this. Should be flashing unless they've changed this a little bit. Okay, see how it flashed? That's because we need to prevent the default. The default action is for it to go to a script, and we don't want that with JavaScript. So we're going to say event dot prevent default. And then we're going to say, that's actually all we need to say because we have event up here. So now we're going to see the log works. Okay. Works. This may not be super necessary for this tutorial, but I'm already here, so let's do it. Let's get the values for this thing. So if we want the value for your name, we're going to say quotes name. sorry, we're going to say value. Sorry, this has to have an ID too, equals name. Now, this is where I do use IDs in forms. I use them all the time in forms. That's why I'm mainly showing you forms right now. If you're wondering why I dived into forms, I feel like this is where you should use them. And this is phone. Okay, now how do we get the values from that? We're going to say var name equals document.query selector name. I'm just going to borrow this because we're going really long on this one, but that's okay. Value query selector name. And then here, we're just going to copy this whole thing again, and we're going to do phone. Oops. Phone. Okay. Now, let's refresh again. And wait, first of all, let's log. Name, comma, phone. Now we should be able to see both of them. Blah, blah, blah. Phone, da, da, da. Submit. Oh, we need one other thing. Know why I did that? If you know JavaScript, if you're pretty good at JavaScript, you might know. I know I make this mistake all the time, so I just have to add dot value because I forget it constantly. Okay, so now it should work. So now we'll do blah, 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 da, da, da. Cool, and we got it. So now I want to show you one other thing real quick. The main reason we listen to the submit event of a form and we want to listen to the ID is so we can add in some special HTML validation. Okay, before we even submit it to anywhere, we want to make sure we got the values. So check this out. If I submit this by itself with nothing in it, it lets me. See how it's like logging, but it's logging nothing? I got 2 logs over here, but nothing was there. Let me put 1 in there and you'll see it. So you can see I didn't, like, name didn't come through. What I can do is I can come over here and I can say required. And if I put required on both of these, then now I'm getting validation with this. I know this may not seem super relevant to IDs, but to me it is, and that's why I'm covering it. So if it feels like I'm off in the weeds to you, I apologize, but I think this is super important. So now I'm going to say required. And as promised, this was the bonus part, right? This is what, like, how this affects you in JavaScript, not just in HTML and CSS, and why I'm hoping this video will kind of stand out amongst the other IDs versus classes is because I took it a little bit further, right? I want you to have all the info, not just some of the info. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to hit submit. Oh boy, I can't go without that one. So I'm going to have to put in Eric and hit submit. Oh yeah, I need this one too. Now I can submit it. Boom, bada bing, I have both of them, right? And that's it. This is the main reason I want you to use IDs, is because this form is very unique. You're not going to have another form exactly like this. So yeah, that's all. Let's try this real quick. Let's put 2 of these things. Okay, what happens when I do the second one? Doesn't even work. Still the required does, but the IDs are not working. You're never going to have that ID. You're not going to have that thing twice. So I hope you guys like this. I think it was pretty thorough. I was actually a little worried before I started making the video because I was like, there's so many things I want to cover and I need to make sure I cover them all. And I really think that I did. I think I got the gist of all the most important stuff. Again, if you're not sure, default to classes. When you know you're going to use a, ID or like something that's going to be only one time, go ahead and use an ID. For forms, always use IDs. And yeah, keep in mind that using classes with custom, well, it's gone now, but remember our custom attribute of type of phone? That's really cool stuff. It took me a long time to learn that. So I hope that made sense to you and you're able to implement that in your own code, because honestly, it keeps your code really clean and it's a really cool way to use classes and custom attributes. I think it's bomb personally. So do me a favor. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. I'm going to be trying to make more free content just like this, but the subscriptions and the likes really encourage me and help me keep doing it. So big thank you if you can do that for me. I really appreciate it. Until the next video, I'll see you later. Thanks for stopping in to see this one. Bye.